Okay, folks, good evening. Thank you so much for having made it. I know there's been some issues with trains and planes and whatnot, but thankfully David's here against heavy odds. We had an easy jet flight, which thankfully made it on time, but then the train broke down. But against heavy odds, David is here, which is great. Maybe before we start, we have some very esteemed guests this evening. We have Aoife McGarry, the ambassador of Ireland to Switzerland. David is Irish, one of Ireland's favorite sons, I would say. At least that's
It's the propaganda.
that's the word around town anyway. So Aoife, I pass you the mic.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, as Boris said, as Ireland's ambassador to Switzerland. And it's wonderful to always be on a new occasion in Switzerland and to meet so many new people. And it is such a great pleasure to join for this discussion of Money, a Story of Humanity by global economist, best-selling author, podcaster, documentary maker, broadcaster, and most importantly, as Boris said, Irishman, David McWilliams. And we're thrilled to have you here in Switzerland tonight, and congratulations on your fantastic book. So thank you, as I said, Boris, for your introduction and for the organisation of this event. And thank you, Bridget O'Donovan, over here, one of our great Irish community in Lausanne, for putting me in touch with Boris here at the wonderful Library of Mistakes. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's such a beautiful space, Boris, and it's great to be acquainted with it, and I hope to come back already. As ambassador to Switzerland, I'm based in Bern in a very small embassy team, and we count ourselves very lucky to work with an array of contacts across Switzerland, contacts such as Bridget, who do so much for fostering the Swiss-Irish relationship. And I can't but take the opportunity to talk to a new audience just for 2 minutes about the Swiss-Irish relationship, because it is an incredible relationship. And over my 2 years here as ambassador, I've been so struck by the depth of the connection between Ireland and Switzerland, and one that goes back through cultural, political and economic links, and stretches back to the 7th century with the travels of Irish monk St. Gall, who founded the monastic city, today's city of St. Gallen, through to, of course, one of our greatest literary exports, James Joyce, who spent the latter portion of his life in Zurich. So our small green island is often referred to as the Isle of Saints and Scholars, and I'm very glad that David is here tonight, following in those hallowed footsteps. So we have a wonderful relationship, as I said, a two-way trade in goods and services relationship of 35 billion per annum, which is very significant for Ireland. And of course, our two countries also have particular associations with money. And these are images that have evolved significantly during what is our relatively recent history. And in this book, David writes on the 5,000 years of our relationship with money, our successes and mistakes, and how these have shaped us. So, ladies and gentlemen, the winner of various accolades from the Financial Times, The Economist, The Observer, Prospect Magazine, I'm really looking forward, and I know all of you are, to the discussion of Money, a Story of Humanity with David tonight, and what we can all learn from the past to help us avoid becoming perhaps another volume on these shelves here. So, Gur Míle Mágaibh, thank you very much, and thank you again, Boris. It's lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aoife. Bonsoir tout le monde. Guten Abend. And let's commence.
Indeed. David no longer needs any introduction from me, obviously.
And by the way, Boris, thank you for inviting me here, because the Library of Mistakes is an amazing idea. And it captures what I've always thought about money and finance, that it's much less an exercise in economics and much more an exercise in human psychology and our relentless stupidity, which makes us beautiful, which makes us human. So, and I know that the founder, Russell, is from Belfast. I think he's actually even from a place called Donaghadee, which is very, very East Belfast. So he's a very good target for me to slag. So it's all good. And you're Russian.
Yes.
So how did you end up here?
Ooh, long story. I first ended up in the U.S. Actually, before the Soviet Union had collapsed. I was part of an exchange program, and in a lovely city of Syracuse, in upstate New York, the snowiest city in all of North America, most likely. And I was very lucky. I got offered a full scholarship and to go to Syracuse University.
Great.
And my host family took me in for 4 years, absolutely for
That's
free.
amazing.
And so that my whole life sort of went on from there. I graduated, got a job. Told your fellow compatriots a funny story about St. Patrick's Day and my first interview at Bear Stearns. I wore a green suit, which was the only suit I owned.
You might as well double down.
And basically that alone landed me the job, which
It's as good a reason as any to get a job.
indeed.
It was a mistake.
Yes, which turned out okay afterwards. And so then I with a friend, I didn't want to be an investment banker after having worked for 2 years at Bear Stearns. That was one thing I very
And
very
Bear
clearly
Stearns
understood.
didn't want to be investment bankers either. By the looks of
Exactly.
things.
It took
But
a little longer to
go bust.
realize that, but yes. And so a friend of mine and I started a small investment fund, which was, I was only 25, so this was a very high risk endeavor, but this is what I'm involved with to date. So this has been sort of my main project ever since. And we ended up in Switzerland because my wife was in the audience when we got married and came to New York. Told me that
How are you?
she told me that New York is not a place where she'd want to live long term, and so this was, this was. I told her, okay, well, where would you like to go? Initially, the idea was to go back to Moscow, but I think we decided that our fund was very young at the time, that our investors wouldn't appreciate somebody packing up and shipping off to Moscow a couple of years after our fund started. So we settled on Europe as a compromise, and we wanted to go someplace French speaking. And I thought
Who's that you see?
I was a big fan of Switzerland already, and I thought, well, the French part of Switzerland is probably the ideal place. And so this is how we ended up in Lausanne, and we came here in 2006. And
Great.
I think probably one of the better decisions we made.
Yeah, no, I think so. If you've got room for an itinerant economist, I'll join you happily in this neck of the woods.
Sounds good.
No, it's great. But listen, it's lovely to be here. And
Thank you.
it's funny you mentioned Syracuse. Syracuse, the original Syracuse.
Is in Sicily. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was made it into the book. It was where Archimedes was bludgeoned by Romans, and for some reason the editor took it out, and I didn't realize it. Because when you write these books, you've no idea. There's thousands of editions going X and Y, and there's American editors, and there's a British editor, and la 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 la. And it's only when I actually finally read it after it was published, I said, "Fuck, where's Syracuse? It's gone." So we'll do it again. But just funny you mentioned New York. I'm just back from. You said you didn't like New York. I'm just back from New York, and I took my 90-year-old mother, who was 90 last Saturday, to visit her grandson in New York, and her grandson has done what all Irish kids do, which is you send them to the posh private school. They go to Trinity College. They do very well in their degree. You've got great hopes for them, and they become barmen in Midtown, New York. It's a proper Paddy. Yeah, but my mother said, it's interesting, my mother said to me, she's from West Cork, and she said, after about 3 or 4 days, she says, "Come here." I said, "What?" She says, "We should have come here in the first place." I didn't realise my mum and dad were planning to emigrate in the 50s.
Oh, really?
When they were just met each other, and they got the heebie-jeebies. And my mother, looking back on her life at 90, it's quite interesting, she said, this would have been a much more exciting life.
Really?
Yeah, it's interesting, you know. 'Cause a lot of people always say, "Oh, I don't like the pace and the attitude and the madness." But it's funny, if you get to 90, you think, fuck it, that's what I want to do. Anyway, let's talk about the book.
Sounds good. Well, what prompted you to write the book?
write the
first?
book?
Yeah. Where did the idea come from? What?
Well, I suppose just some of you who might know that I actually lived in this part of the world. I worked for UBS for quite some time, and I had worked for the Irish Central Bank prior to that, and then for BNP Paribas after that. I spent a lot of time in Russia during those times, and I had a niggling feeling, which was a little bit worrying for me, that, come on in. Come on in. It's great that Swiss people are late to us. In fact, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Not Swiss.
Not Swiss. Okay. Swiss residents. I was really very, very, I kind of chuckled to myself when the train was late today. Because I thought, every now and then they mess up, which is kind of nice. But I had this sneaking suspicion, having been a monetary economist for the last 30 odd years, that my tribe, economists, who have taken it upon ourselves to explain money to the world, I mean, that's our job, is to explain money to the world. Most of us don't really understand what money is. And this was a sort of a, not so much a revelation to me, but it was a moment when I thought, wow. And the reason I say this is that, you know, when you start as a central banker, you're in effect the tabernacle of money. So with a little bit of sort of hocus pocus, the host is turned into the body and blood of Christ. In the same way, money is just magicked up. It's produced. And it struck me then in investment banking and then subsequently in other areas that economists in general are a wee bit like plumbers. So if you have a plumber here, they'll be able to tell you how the water goes around the building. And if you turn on the tap, a combination of gravity and pressure and density will push the water around. But if you sit with the plumber after the job and you sit and have a pint with him, it's usually him, and you say, okay, I get how water goes around the pipes, but why is water essential for human life? I think the plumber would have a difficult time explaining that. And what I've always been amazed is, like, you know, money is attractive. It's mendacious, it's dangerous, it changes our state of mind, it's sexy, it's duplicitous, it brings out the worstness, the bestness, all these things. And yet economics minimizes it to essentially a type of plumbing. How money goes from the central bank to the investment bank, from the banking system, right? And I was much more interested in what it does to us, because I've lived with it all my life. And that was a thought that I have, a rather renegade thought that I couldn't really articulate when I was a young economist, because you're young and you're not meant to know anything. And so consequently, over the last, I would say, 20 years, I've been thinking of writing this book. I've written other books, but I've been thinking of writing this one because I think it's essential to locate money in the story of humanity. And by that I mean, it's impossible to conceive of this world that we live in. I think there's nearly 8 billion of us. It's one of the nice things about Ireland. It is not full. It is very underpopulated. But it's impossible to conceive of this world we live in without understanding this bizarre thing, this thing that keeps us all together. And that's where I got the idea. What happened was I was blessed by the pandemic. I'm one of the very few people who could say that. So I signed a contract with Simon & Schuster to write one book. And then the pandemic arrived and I was kind of stuck at home in the basement. And that allowed me to begin to read a lot of evolutionary biology, a lot of anthropology, a lot of ancient history. And that's when the idea that money is actually a technology came to me. And not only is it technology, but it's what we call in economics a social technology. So most of economics talks about technology, but it talks about things like, this physical technology, And if you think about the history of humanity, one of the attributes of our species is that we're very, very good at solving problems using technologies, whether they be physical, typically they are. But there's another less understood or less illuminated area of economics, which is social technologies. So these are technologies that allow us to do what humans are amazing at, which is collaborating at scale. So rather than you and me collaborating, all of us collaborate. And we have that great idea of, 10 heads are better than one, 100 heads, 1,000 heads, etc. So one of those is obviously the legal system. Whether you like it or not, it kind of sets the rules of the game. Possibly organized religion is another way of, this is how we interact. And money, for me, is the most exceptionally powerful social technology that humans have come up with. And once I was kind of armed with that idea, I thought, okay, well then let's go back and see where it all started. And that's where we start really. I mean, I start in Belgium, in the Belgian, there's a thing called the Ashango bone, which is about 20,000 years ago. But I decided to go and see it in Belgium. And then you realize that only weirdos go to museums these days, right? And it's weirdos and school children, which is very disconcerting, right? No, it's true, because everyone goes online. So, you know, the idea of going to a museum to see something like the museum here, you know, we don't do that anymore. So I went to see the Ashango bone, which dates from about 20,000 years ago. It's the femur of a baboon, and it is thought that the notches on this bone are the first evidence of a rudimentary balance sheet, in effect. And the notches, so basically Boris owes David something, and at the end of some period, be it a year or a lunar cycle or whatever, we clean the slate, and that's what the notches are. So it's seen as the very first evidence of counting. And then the question is, what were people counting? What were they counting? And one of the theories is they were basically counting debits and credits. And so the book starts there, but it really gets into history in about 5,000 years ago. And then what you see is some very interesting things, that money arrives. I've chosen the Sumerian civilization, could have chosen the Chinese civilization between the rivers, but I decided it's Sumeria. And money arrives and it co-evolves with other fascinating technologies like writing, accountancy, mathematics, religion, legal systems, all those things. So that was the book. Is what I'm trying to do in this book, and thankfully the readers have responded to it, is liberate money from economists. What really struck me is I'd never met a rich economist. No, really. I thought that was true. I'd never met a rich economist. I thought, okay, hold on, you're talking about money all the time, but you're no good with it. You're actually shite with money. Have you ever met a rich economist? No. So that's sort of the thing. So it was kind of half mischief, which is most of my ideas, Boris, are half mischief and half kind of chuckling to myself and giggling. And then my kids tell me, you're being an idiot and go and write your book, Dad. But I think it's not the only way of looking at money, but I think it should be more common to look at money as this amazing, what I call it, it's a force. It's like a Promethean force. Like if you think that the Greeks thought that, you know, the world was a function of, or the result of 4 forces, elemental forces, you know, earth, wind, fire, and water. And they were natural elements which we galvanized to basically colonize the earth, which we did as a species. I think there's a 5th element, and that element is money. And that is a human element. And without understanding the force, the propulsion force, the animation force, the positive and negative force of energy, of money, you can't understand us humans at all.
Oh, definitely. I think, the book does a tremendous job of showing the evolution of money, showing that it's not something that some evil people dreamt up as a way to exploit their fellow human beings, or that it's the forbidden fruit that sort of brings out only the worst in us. That it is as you say, a social technology. Well, and you compared it to language, which I think is the first time I saw that, and it struck me as very powerful. That it does simplify the world around us. It allows us to interpret an array, an avalanche of signals and make sense of them, and it enables us to cooperate.
I think it's a shortcut. So if you could imagine, it's a shortcut to understanding the world. So for example, I buy a train ticket today, and I have no idea who this Swiss person is. They have no idea who I am. They've never seen me. They have no reason to trust me. Absolutely no reason. There's no information. They don't know who I am. I could be a mass murderer for all they know, all that sort of stuff. But because we trust the currency that we trade in, we do a deal. So there's a French sociologist called Marcel Mauss, some clever French fellow. They're always very clever, those French fellows. And then even if they're not, they say they're clever, right? And Marcel Mauss said something. His whole idea was gifting and how sociology of gifting and societies of gifting. Anyway, he said one thing. He said, in order to trade, man first had to throw down the spear. And that really interested me. That the idea was that trade is an alternative to war. So I was brought up, I went to a Catholic school when there were priests. There's not many of them knocking around anymore. And I believe that money is the source of all evil. I believe that. St. Paul, I thought, oh, that makes sense, okay. And then I think, no, actually, the reasons that societies willingly adopted this technology, it was a mechanism by which we could cooperate rather than actually go to war. Not exclusively, but it's a way of looking at it. And I think that the greatest example of that as a functioning society is Switzerland. No, really.
You could say that, yeah.
No, the Calvinists learned banking, and that was their power. And they learned banking in Geneva. And here, I presume, in Lausanne. But, yeah, so it was the idea that what intrigued me about our culture and its sort of slightly derogatory creed, you know this word, the creed, right, about money, particularly the Christian culture. And I actually thought, like, why did Jesus emerge where he did and when he did? This is always like, because it's not just like something must have been happening in the society. And if you think that he emerges at the end of the Greco period, or the Greco period, I presume, if you're a real Puritan, and he's talking about the Greco-Roman civilization. The Greco-Roman civilization is the first, particularly the Greeks, heavily monetized urban civilization. And prior to that, prior to the emergence of money in the Greek world, Lydian world and the Greek world, if you were poor, it was preordained by the gods. So that wasn't so bad. It's like, oh, shit, I'm poor. Okay, fair enough. But the gods have said I'm poor, right? And then as the society becomes monetized, certain individuals who were good with this weird technology money go from being poor to being rich. And that begins the process of a meritocracy. And a meritocracy is very dislocating because if you live in a fledgling meritocracy, which I believe the first monetary societies were, if you're not rich, there's something wrong with you. Because if you're rich and you understand this technology, so getting rich or getting richer and having more spoils in this world is in some way a reflection of your ability. And if you're not rich, you need a countervailing narrative, something to give you succor, something to allow you sleep at night, some other story. And if you contrast what Jesus was saying, think about what he was saying. He was saying, the meek will inherit the earth. This is revolutionary stuff. This is so radical because they were coming from a society that had inherited a view that big men ran the world. Rich guys, Zeus, right? Sitting in Mount Olympus, throwing lightning around the place. Okay, like Elon Musk with wings, sitting up there, right? And the whole society genuflected to these rich guys and powerful men. And then this little weirdo comes along. This little guy, son of a carpenter, and he says, no, man, that's not what it's all about. It's all about meekness. And that rich guy, he's not going to go to heaven, or at least the camel will find it easier to go through the eye of the needle, right? So why did that gain fertility? And I think it's because the monetized society needed a savior, a countervailing narrative for those who lost. And so I think a lot of things that we live and we see have their source in this bizarre thing called money.
No, it's true. I thought it was fascinating. There's so many, at least for me, so many revelations that so many great discoveries, like the mathematical concept of zero, that it was very helpful in doing commerce.
Yeah.
Or the fact that Gutenberg was able to commercialize his great invention of the printing press because there were annuities and a very well functioning market in Mainz at the time, or that the Dutch rose to the pinnacle of the global world order because they had some great innovations like the corporation or the Wisselbank and the very
So you did read it?
long-term bonds. I did.
That's pretty impressive. It's one of the very few, because when you do interviews like this, lots of people pretend they read it. It's like spoofing away. Like,
No, that's part of the reason why
I'm only joking.
I got a copy for both of my kids.
Where are the kids?
Well, one of them's here.
How are you? You well? It's very good. It's the Bible.
He owns a copy, so
There's a copy of Deutsch and in French as well.
he's more of an English speaker.
Okay,
So
fair enough.
this,
Is there a little English ghetto here in Lausanne?
do you hear more and more English
Do you?
nowadays? Yeah.
It's lovely to hear French being spoken. I'd forgotten, that it's a very incredibly difficult language to relearn. I can tell you. I went to university in Belgium, and so I did a master's through French, but that was not yesterday. And I thought I spoke French, and then I went to, and Aoife, you might know this. There's a little place where Irish diplomats go to learn French in Avignon, outside Avignon. And I went there, and for the first day I was parlaying away. And my teacher was Sandrine. And she says, David, you are very good with your hands. You are very good with your face. I get what you're trying to say, but you can't speak French. It was amazing. And I had to start at the very beginning again. Anyway, let's go on. See, they're quite blunt, French ladies. It's like, okay, fair enough. No sugarcoating here.
Exactly. Another thing that I found fascinating in the book was that it seemed as though a lot of great breakthroughs and innovations in the world of arts are also somehow linked to breakthroughs in the monetary domains as well. Do you think that's a coincidence or no?
Well, it's interesting. Aoife mentioned James Joyce, and every Irish spoofer pretends they've read Joyce, right? That's the thing, right? It's part of spoofology, and we forgive each other for spoofology.
I haven't read the Ulysses.
I have.
It's one of the
But I
longest
only read it when
books.
I was reading this bloody thing. I was writing this thing. But the only way to read it is with an audiobook at the same time.
Okay.
And if you're really into reading it, there's a great audiobook which was recorded in 1982. And the lead actor is a fellow called Jim Norton. And again, I can't, what's the Molly's in the name? Anyway, it's essential because it's the only way you can really decipher it. But then once you get into it, it's great stuff. But just one thing I was just thinking, Conor, would you do me a favour? Will you take 2 or 3 photos and send them to me? Because I want to put them on my socials, which will be good for the museum. Because, we can get more people interested in this caravan. Well, okay. The really good ones. The ones, yeah. Exactly. Where I'm looking like that. Yeah, exactly. No, what intrigued me about Joyce, there are many things, obviously, but the economist in me was fascinated by the following, which was that in October of 1909, late October, James Joyce came home to Ireland for the last time. And he was living in Trieste. And he came home, and the question is, why did he come home to Ireland? And he came home because 6 weeks prior to that, his father had sent James Joyce's sister out to Trieste to see what James was doing, because he'd been there for ages, and he had 2 kids, as they used to say, out of wedlock in Ireland, right? So poor old Nora was lumping these 2 kids around, and James was fond of white wine and going out and stuff like that. Anyway, Eva went to try and find him, and for 2 days she couldn't find him. He never came home, and he was in the cinema. And the cinema was this extraordinary technology at the time, and people were fascinated by it. And in Trieste, you forget, was one of the most cosmopolitan cities in Europe. It was Austrian ostensibly, but it was full of Italian irredentists. It was full of Slovenes, Croats, Serbs, Czechs, Jews, Greeks, so much so that the Triestine language, which Joyce's children spoke, had 21 linguistic origins. That's amazing. It had Armenian, it had Greek, it had Yiddish, it had all these languages, because the people were basically a cosmopolitan melting pot, which is, I presume, why Joyce went there. And they were obsessed with the new. And what you find in cosmopolitan, vibrant cities is an obsessive with modernity, which can sometimes lead you to very strange places. Modernism in general can lead you up odd cul-de-sacs. But Joyce loved it. And his sister Eva said to him, "Oh my God, James, you're at the cinema. Isn't it amazing? There's 36 cinemas here in Trieste, and there isn't one in Dublin." And Joyce got the idea to set up a cinema. And that fascinated me, that he came home and he set up a cinema called the Volta Cinema in Mary Street, which is now Penny's, which is how we really regard our culture in Ireland. A bunch of fucking Philistines. Isn't it amazing? Aoife, you should be leading the charge here, right? Yeah, exactly. Primark. Anyway, that story, I read it. There was a fella called, if you're interested in this, there's a fella called Ellman who wrote an amazing biography of Joyce. Yeah, it's really well worth it. And anyway, what intrigued me was the mind that wrote Ulysses was the same mind that set up a cinema. And that sent me down this unusual idea, which is that great commercial innovation and great artistic innovation come from the same place, which is a rather unusual mind that doesn't want a boss, that doesn't want a wage, that doesn't want an insurance policy, that has this idea that they can do better, something better, that says, I've read something and I'm going to write it better, or I've painted something, I'm going to paint better. I've been in a sweet shop, I'm going to use a better sweet shop. I've been in an investment fund, I'm going to do a better fund. So there's something about the minds of people who create. And then it struck me, going back to my school time, that the boys who were in my class who've subsequently become very good entrepreneurs and the boys in my class who become artists were very similar. They were kind of cussed, they were non-dogmatic, they were a bit annoying, they weren't the easiest to get on with, they had a sort of a slightly screw you attitude. So at the heart of these people was dissent. They dissented from the norm. And this intrigued me and I explored it more. And then what you realize then is what sort of cultures allow those people to flourish. And this is what fascinated me about Trieste. It allowed people to flourish. And then you realize, okay, look at the societies that have great art. They also have great commerce. They tend typically, because the types of people who are dissenters are accepted in there. You take French Huguenots. Who built the banking system here?
Yeah.
It wasn't, you know,
Or the watch industry.
it wasn't a Heine Hinterseer up in the mountains, right? The typical Schweizerdeutsche. It wasn't. It was some French dissenting Calvinists in Geneva and the watchmaking. And these are people who were kicked out of France. You know, we forget Calvin was a Frenchman, he wasn't Swiss, right? So where you see dissenters, you see amazing commerce, you see art, you see extraordinary things. And so the Joycean idea was that James Joyce could never have written Ulysses in Ireland because it would have suffocated him. And it's not that the society has to always seek to create innovators, because I don't think you can. But it's a society that doesn't besmirch them, that doesn't degrade them, that doesn't sneer at them. And I think so for example, if you think about Ireland, we've been independent about 100 years. And for the first 70 years of that independence, we were not the 7th worst economy in Europe, not the 3rd, not the 2nd. We were the worst. The worst. And I've always thought, why was that? I remember going to Canada as a kid and working as a dishwasher. Again, my son is following my footsteps. He's slightly higher up on the chain, but it's a family thing. And I remember sitting in Canada, and it was 1980, whatever it was, right? And I was a young fella, about 18. And I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at these Canadians, and they're very rich. And I thought to myself, they're not smarter than us. Why? Why are we so poor? And then if you buy into this idea of diversity and dissenters and allowing people of different creeds and attitudes to come into your society, for the first 70 years of Irish society, we lived in a theocratic, dogmatic state. And if you were different, if you were gay, or if you were bi, or if you were told to get out of the country. So a whole 3 generations of dissenters from the norm left our country. And they became incredibly successful in London and New York and Australia. And we were left with our mediocre nonsense. And it's quite interesting for me that in the 90s, we started having referendums on, I know it sounds unusual, but on divorce. I was explaining last night, I was giving a talk in the Mansion House in London. When I first went to London, I went on a school tour and we came back with boxes of condoms. There was a black market in condoms in Ireland in the 1980s because you couldn't buy condoms in Ireland, right? And of course, the great thing about it is you could sell them at a much higher price. And of course, who did you sell them to? Irish girls. Because Irish blokes don't give a shit, right? Irish girls were afraid of getting pregnant, right? So there was a really, right? And that's all in my lifetime, right?
Hard to believe.
It's hard to believe, but that's true. And then we had condoms, and then we had divorce, and then we had abortion, and then we had gay rights, and all these things which kept saying basically to people, it's okay, come in. You're all right, you can live amongst us. And we were rewarded with this extraordinary economic growth. I don't think it's the main reason, but I think it's an interesting observation about the types of people who left and the types of people who stayed, and now the types of people who are allowed, feel free in Ireland to be sexually liberated, emotionally liberated, or whatever it happens to be. And I think, that's the lesson. And I talk about Amsterdam. I mean, the Dutch understood that both French Huguenots and Sephardic Jews from Portugal and Spain had something. They had something different. Spinoza was Portuguese. He wasn't even Dutch, right? He was fucking one generation out of Lisbon. So, and what they did with these brains is they said, go and do your money thing, do your commerce, and just pay taxes to us and we leave you alone. And so it doesn't surprise me that the perpetual bond comes at the same time as Vermeer. Because it's coming from the same place, which is the curious human mind.
That makes sense. No, I thought it was
and it's why, like, for example, Peter the Great goes to Amsterdam
to learn
because he couldn't understand, because he's a Russian. He says, I'm the biggest boss man. I've got the most slaves because everyone was a serf. I've got the most land. I've the biggest army, and we're all poor. And these little Dutch guys, of which there's hardly any of them. They live in a country underwater.
Yeah,
and they're all rich, and it was because the Dutch mind was liberated. That's what I think.
That makes perfect sense. As you said earlier, that money is duplicitous and it does have the dark sides, brings out the dark sides in us. Is it things like, in the book you talk about one of the things that what money accomplishes, it turns inert wealth into something liquid.
Yes.
And so then we get the John Law sort of debacle.
A great man.
He was brilliant, but it was a...
The world is full of John Laws, as you know.
Yes.
To be like the plague if you're running a fund. Now, John Law was just... Do you know about this guy? John Law was a Scottish murderer. It's quite amazing.
Killed somebody in a duel.
Yeah, he killed somebody in a duel. And not only did he kill somebody, but there are 2 stories, one of which is he killed somebody in a duel because he and this guy, Edmund Wilson, were kind of dandies around town, and they were involved in not a threesome, not a throuple. I was talking to my daughter the other day. I'd accused somebody of being in a threesome. She goes, "No, it's a love triangle, Dad. It's quite different." I said, "Okay," right? She said, and I was like, "Those your friends are in a threesome." She was like, "Dad, they're not. It's just somebody's in love with some." Anyway, right. So John Law and Edmund Wilson were sleeping with a woman called Betty Villiers, which is not that unusual. These things happen all the time. But what was really dangerous is Betty Villiers was also sleeping with the king. You don't want to be riding the king's missus. That's a bad, if you're going to have an affair, stay away from the king's missus. As a general rule, I suspect. And so that's the ostensible reason for the duel, because Wilson found out that Law was sleeping with the same woman and took a big hissy fit, did the male thing, big peacock, blah, 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 blah. And, but the other story is even more interesting, that Wilson was actually the gay lover of a man called Charles Spencer. Charles Spencer went on to be the treasurer of England, but quite fantastically, Charles Spencer is Diana Spencer's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. So Charles Spencer is actually the next king of England's, William's, descendant. And his gay lover was Edmund Wilson. And John Law was hired as a hitman to kill him, that's a much better story. But it hasn't been substantiated, but there's lots of rumours. There's a lot of gay literature about this, early 17th century gay literature. But the long and the short of it is, Law came up with the idea that you can have fiat currencies. You can have currencies that are linked to nothing but the promise of the state. And that, I think, is one of the most creative things that humanity has come up with. You won't hear that often now, but I do. And but it all came a cropper in the South Sea bubble. It all came to an end. The story is quite fantastic. It's about speculation, greed, avarice, the madness of crowds, FOMO, the fear of missing out. It's AI.
And you think it's inevitable?
I think it is. When I first started working in the central bank in Ireland, we had a currency crisis. And that's when I saw from the inside what actually happens when the herd goes mad and decides that your currency is worth less than it is, and actually speculates against it. And I remember being on the inside, being very young and realizing, okay, that's how it works. That basically, one of the big problems with economics is economics assumes one cardinal rule, which is wrong. And I noticed this because I teach in Trinity, so I get the kids come in. You kind of ask them, have you done economics before? And lots of blokes put up their hands. Usually girls don't, because they don't want to speak, which is the weird thing. And some fella, I don't know, some guy called Marcus puts up his hand. Hi, how are you, Professor? All right, I'm great. It's a school called Gonzaga, which is a lot to answer for in Ireland.
Yeah.
That's going to be my next book. Anyway, and you say to the geezer, like, what did you learn in economics? You learned it at school, what did you learn? And they'll say, well, the first lesson, Professor, is that man is rational.
Oh, yeah. Homo economicus, right?
Yeah, I said, really? Okay, so what does that mean? He said, when we're making economic decisions, like about money, we are cold, scientific, logical, clinical, unencumbered by emotions or biases. And I just look at them and say, have you ever met a human like that? Or would you go for a drink with someone like that? No. And it's the madness. And the reason I think the reason that all these crazy things happen all the time is that we're a very social animal. And we're a very chatty animal. And we're driven by emotion. So when economists see a price, they see a number. When real people see a price, we get a feeling, right? Am I rich? Am I poor? Is this good? Is it bad? And it's the feeling that drives us. That's number one. And the second thing is, because we're very chatty, we influence each other all the time. And we believe in irrational things. And we believe in kind of madness, you know, like I'm at this stage in my life that I have friends who are on their third marriage. And I'm thinking, what bit of the two feckin' earlier ones didn't you get, you gobshites? And they're like, oh, no, but this time it's different, you know. You know, it's completely, she loves me. I'm like, man, you're 57, she's 28. Right? It is not love, right? It is something, but it ain't fucking love, right? So, but because we're humans, we believe in an ideal future. So we believe that, you know, the price of gold can go to 4,000 and 10,000, or that AI, you know, which is, if you think about data centers, I mean, those GPUs that they're all betting on, the whole idea is that every GPU becomes more obsolete than the one previous. So it's a perishable good. So it's like digital lettuce. Right? It's not capex at all, but we believe it should because of the FOMO. So I think law and that chapter just brings out the madness in us, which is kind of sweet.
Yeah, and there's tulip mania. There's plenty.
All the good
examples.
stuff.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you also, what are your thoughts on usury? Why was it, you know, Marx, the church, they were vehemently opposed to lending and charging interest. Was it sort of a way to prevent the rich from getting richer or prevent half the population from ending up in debtor's prison?
I think,
and how do we get over it?
I think it's really interesting. I think it's something I've missed in the book. And if I were to write it again, I would go back and I'd be less anti-clerical.
Okay.
So I was brought up to believe that the reason the church was against usury was, frankly, it was a money-making machine itself. Mm-hmm. And it wanted to lend. Okay? And I kind of accepted that because I'm of a certain age, Irish person of a certain age, that anti-clericalism was like a badge of honor for us. If you went to a big Catholic school, you were against the people on the top. Right? So I accepted the sort of Marxist view. Now I realize that Marx wrote the most influential book in the world and everything in it was wrong. Which is
the Capital?
Yeah, it's what happens as you get older. You realize this is all shite, right? But when you're young, it's a great idea about how the world works and how we are, humans work. And so I was inclined to believe that, flippantly, that the reason the church was against usury was because it was such a profitable business and they kept it to themselves. But if I were to write that chapter again, I would be more open-minded, that I think there is a deep side of the Christian church that understands debt bondage. And I think that comes from the Old Testament. If you are inclined to read the Old Testament, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, these books, there are large sections given over to debt bondage. So I believe that the church was thinking on a higher level, and I just got subsumed with undergraduate Marxist thinking. And if I were to write it again, I would explore that idea more, because it is something we need to be very aware of. I think that, you know, this is one of our major dilemmas of our modern society now, is that there are an unimaginable amount of humans in a purgatory of debt. And this is not healthy for society. And if you read Leviticus, they basically say, look, your neighbour's nice, good skin, very decent, but you put him into debt bondage for too long and he's going to rise up against you. That's why you have that idea of the Jubilee year, which is a very old idea, very ancient idea. So we will be more charitable next time to our ecclesiastical friends.
Makes sense, yeah. And what are your thoughts on fractional reserve banking? Mervyn King wrote a book, sort of The End of Alchemy, saying that the idea of transforming risky long-term loans into riskless, on-demand deposits sort of is pure alchemy, and it's the root of instability, crises, booms and busts. You think this is something that will endure, or it's something that's past its due date.
Well, it's a funny thing about busts and all this. I'm inclined to believe that booms are kind of essential for progress. That almost every big technological progress in humanity has at its source a sort of a madness. I was always intrigued, I think I mentioned in the book, that Charles Darwin, who's obviously a clever fella now, good at the old biology, Charles, he was good at biology, but he was terrible with money. And he lost a fortune on a railway boom. There were significant railway booms in the UK and in Ireland. It's kind of weird in Ireland, we don't realise it. During the famine in Ireland, the west of the country was starving. The east of the country was going through a massive, massive capitalist boom based on a speculative mania in railway shares. So I live in a place called Dunleary, and the railway from what is now Pier Station, used to be called Westland Row Station, to Dunleary was the first ever suburban train line, right? We've built nothing since, by the way. It's true. Like, you come to Switzerland, you think, what have we been doing in Ireland? The railway network, right? But because it was this big new technology, it was going to change the world, it was going to change our relationship with time and location and distance and all that sort of stuff. It was a mad speculative boom. And maybe you need these speculative booms to generate the enthusiasm for the engineering or technological madness. So if you think of the Americans, they have maybe lost the craziness of engineering booms. So Mervyn King, the problem with me reading the likes of Mervyn King is they're so dull to read. It's really dull shit.
I enjoyed it, actually.
But it will put you to sleep, And I think that the central bankers should be sent on a creative writing course before they take pen to paper to tell stories. But I get your point. I think fractional reserve banking, it's the essence of banking. It's actually the magic, it's the alchemy of finance. And that's what it is.
So you think
but it is an alchemy.
It is.
Yeah.
So our children and grandchildren will still live in the world of fractional reserve banking?
I think so. The crypto fellas don't believe so.
Yeah.
But I don't believe the crypto fellas either.
Yeah, that was my next question, actually. What do you think cryptocurrencies is a step in the right direction in monetary evolution, or?
I think there's two things, Boris, and you've been involved in the game for a long time. So every generation has its monetary innovation. And money adapts with, what I've said in the book is we were described historically as a pyrophyte species, which is a species that adapts to fire. And I think now we're a plutophyte species, which is a species that is adapted to and constantly adapting with this thing called money. So the idea that now we're at the end of monetary evolution is completely wrong. So as we have a digital economy, as we're tapping, banking will just reflect that. My problem with the crypto guys is they over-argue and say that this is the end of fiat money as we know it, and it will be replaced by crypto. Now that strikes me as very, very naive for three reasons. The first one is that money is so powerful a weapon. And for example, the Swiss franc, what gives the Swiss franc its value? What gives it its value is the fact that the Swiss government requires you to pay your taxes, low as they may be. And I see the Swiss voted for lower taxes again. Was it last week? Or less high taxes. Yeah.
Against
inheritance tax. Yeah. Well, you have inheritance tax here. The whole thing's over. But the Swiss government requires you to pay your taxes in Swiss francs. The American government requires you to pay your taxes in American dollars. So in that way, it solders money and the state on together. They're actually part of the same game. So the first thing is money is public. It's a public good. And in the same way as you cannot, in Switzerland, ring up a vigilante to behave like the Swiss army, right? You have the Swiss army and it's mandated by the state. You have the Swiss franc. So it has to be a public good. Why? Because it is too powerful to give away. The promise of crypto is you give away to some private fellas with, in effect, a printing press in their basement, right? This doesn't seem to me to work, number one. Number two is the notion of language. So in the book, I've compared money to language. And what gives money its extraordinary power is its usability, which is why the US dollar is so strong, despite, recent efforts of Donald Trump to make it less strong. And I think which is kind of bizarre, but anyway. And the crypto guys basically say, look, the monetary system is corrupted, and if I were to start again, I wouldn't start from here. So that reminds me of the English language. So the English language is the default language of the world. It gives its strength, right? Now, is it the easiest language to learn? No. Is it phonetically logical? No. Is it grammatically logical? No. Is it the accumulation of hundreds of years of assimilation of other languages? Yes. So if you were to conceive of a global language, it wouldn't sound like English. And it's very hard to learn as a second language. And then you have people who believed that Esperanto was going to be the second language. And if you've ever met somebody who speaks Esperanto, they'll bore the knickers off you talking about Esperanto. And they're obsessed by it, but nobody else gives a shit. Right? And it's the same as the crypto guys. I've sat in bars with Bitcoin Egypts in my ear. I'm like, give me a pint and talk about whether Leeds United are going to win next week. Important things, right? My point is that the crypto guys think it's the center of the world. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody else does, right? And the third and really final point is that unless you believe that the future of the world is a sort of dystopian, sort of Mad Max image after an apocalypse where Mel Gibson emerges in the desert with fires all around him with a bag of Bitcoin. If you believe that's the future, all day, buy it all. I don't think that's the future of the world. I think the future of the world is a slow evolutionary process of, we make mistakes, we go backwards, we hope we don't fight too much, and we move on. And money. So does it mean that there's no role for digital innovations? Of course there is. But I think central bank digital currencies will put pay to that in time.
So you think that's where we're headed?
I suspect that's where we will arrive there at some stage in the not too distant future.
Interesting.
Which has got a big implication for the banking system.
Definitely.
And I'm not sure the banking system has figured that out yet.
I think it'll be the end of the banking system as we know it. It'll be a very
and we'll start again with something else.
Yeah, interesting. And what do you think about?
We should open up today.
Yes.
Yeah, do some questions as well.
Yeah.
Go for that. Go.
Maybe, so
it's much harder to listen.
Sorry. Yeah. The last question.
Talk.
So where we have arrived with money, do you think it's a good place? We have a fiat system backed by nothing but faith. We have stewards of that system, the central bankers. Jim Grant calls it the PhD standard.
He's right.
A couple of guys in the room who think they can manage monetary
I was one of them. I know. I'm a refugee from that particular ghetto.
Do you think is this sort of the pinnacle, or this is just a sort of a stop that like you say, we will continue muddling through and hopefully coming up with better ways to do this?
I think there's a reason I end the book in Africa. I started the book. Yeah, I started the book in Africa, which makes sense. I mean, if you think money is part of humanity, well, then it makes sense that it started in Africa because we all came from Africa. So that makes complete sense, And then I was doing some work for Oxfam, the charity, and I was in Nairobi, and I'd never been there before. And I went out for a walk in Nairobi. And Nairobi is like every kind of African city. It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's buzzing, it's noisy, it's dirty. All humanity is there. Everything's for sale. Everyone's hustling. And I saw lots of people basically haggling around what looked like a mobile phone shop. But when I say shop, it's not like a Swiss shop. It's like a thing. It's like this with loads of things. And I asked them what the guy, and they said, "Oh, they're buying currency." I said, "What?" They said, "They're buying money." And I said, "Really?" They said, yeah. This is the money we use." I said, "What is it?" It's mobile phone credit. So they had no banking system in Kenya, like most of Africa. So people couldn't access credit. And then mobile phones arrived. And then people figured out, well, actually, rather than pay a bus driver to drive to the countryside to give my granny money that I've earned, basically give it to me in a sack, and the bus driver, chances are, went off or charged 30% to do that, we can just forward her credit, and then she can use the credit to buy milk. So they've created a parallel currency in Kenya, which 60 something, I'm not too sure what it is, it's 60+% of the economy is run on mobile phone credit. They have no money. The currency is obsolete. So I thought that was an amazing idea of, like, all technology. If we come back to the main idea that money is a technology that humans use to make life easier or to understand the world, all technology has to start with a problem which is made better by a solution. The problem with crypto, it's a solution
in search of a problem.
waiting for that problem. There is no big problem in the global financial system. I mean, does it work perfectly? No, but it's like the English language. You know, if we were to start again, the word night wouldn't be spelled N-I-G-H-T. It would be spelled in the American N-I-T-E. In fact, I didn't realize it. Carnegie, the guy gave away all his money, spent a fortune on trying to actually simplify the English language to get people to say night, N-I-T-E, like nightclub in America. But then you say, well, it could also be K-N-I-G-H-T, at night. So, like, my sense is that, you know, the monetary system we have is what we have. And it works because it's the evolutionary product of hundreds of years of innovation. And so we move on slowly. That's my sense. It's not a particularly radical idea, but I think it's the most plausible way of looking at the world. Yeah.
Great. So we'll open the floor to questions.
Sorry about going on there, because it's hot in here. Who has the first question?
Thank you. Very fascinating. I just wanted to ask a question around crypto again. Yuval Noah Harari mentioned that crypto, he described crypto as the currency of mistrust. You spoke about your ticket that you buy based on trust, and he spoke about crypto as the currency of mistrust, and to some extent also compared it to gold. And just if you eliminate the kind of short-term fluctuation, both seems to go up quite significantly lately. What's your opinion on such a view on crypto in that sense?
Well, I think it's very interesting that Hariri talks about trust, because in a way, trust is the ephemeral concept that keeps us all together, right? I trust you, you know, etc. And money amplifies trust because it allows us to use this technology that we don't need to trust each other. So in the price are these enormous amounts of information. I think I described in the book, price is like an encyclopedia of information. I think the problem with the crypto is that I don't trust the people. You know, when Donald Trump introduces a meme coin, I don't trust him. I don't trust his motives. I describe it in the book as a very large lobby group. And they're spending many, many hundreds of millions of dollars trying to lobby US regulators to reduce their reticence to crypto. I don't see any use for crypto. Like stablecoin, what is the point of that? If you think about it, all it is a money market fund. It's like a derivative.
That doesn't pay an interest.
It's a derivative of a dollar. That doesn't pay any interest. Like, what's the point? And then if you look at all the stablecoin transactions, they're just one bunch of stablecoiners trading with each other. So my sense is that I understand that Hariri says that crypto came from mistrust. And I can understand in 2008, 2009, where people were very upset about financial impropriety, about the banking system. Bitcoin, for example, I know it's part of the family, it's not actually part of the exactly same DNA, comes from this urge to tear down the establishment. I don't trust them. Today, the biggest salespeople of crypto are original Wall Street banks, the very people who are supposed to be the enemy. So what I said is that I see a role for digital currencies orchestrated by states. I can't see a world in which crypto becomes anything other than a speculative asset, a marginal curiosity. That's my sense. But you're right about the trust. And I think that the trust was broken in 2008. Is it broken now? Not as much.
You've mentioned that the decent currency is always very closely connected to the decent state, nation state.
Yes.
Like army, taxes, legal system, all that kind of thing, language, which makes the state strong and the currency, respectful.
Yeah.
But what do you think of this weird thing is euro, which
Euro.
is eurozone?
Yeah.
Will it survive in the next 10 years? What's your opinion?
I've spent most of my career listening to English speakers telling me the euro is going to be fucked tomorrow. Right? Okay? I'm serious, I remember going as a central banker, I used to carry the bags for the governor. And because we spoke English, we spoke more to the Bank of England at euro meetings than anybody else. And the Brits would be in here going, it's going to go, I mean, it's not real. It's no government. And then I went to investment banking, and all the English economists, bar none, told me it was going to end. So I think that Anglo-Saxon finance is a derivative of Anglo-Saxon thinking. And part of Anglo-Saxon thinking is a notion that continental Europeans are really stupid. Okay? And we know that's not the case. In fact, there's an argument to say it's the opposite. Okay? And therefore, any sort of grand projet is regarded as a Napoleonic conspiracy against ordinary, decent yeomen. Okay? Now, of course, the euro is the most conspiratorial of all that, because the nation of shopkeepers, the English, find the idea that Germans and Dutch and French and Spaniards and Irish and Italians and Greeks might come together to have the same currency. They find it's an anathema to their sense of nationalism. Now, there are arguments, certainly very strong arguments, to say in 2012, 13, the euro, I think, was very close to blowing apart. And I think, in fact, in the case of Ireland, it might not have been a bad thing if it had all fallen apart and we could devalue our currency and all that sort of stuff, change the relative prices. But we didn't devalue, and then we got Google. And sure, that was, another story, right? And we got the high-tech stuff, right? But we didn't have that in 2011, 12. So I would caution against the Daily Telegraph's editorial about the implosion of the euro, which is only as misguided as the notion that England are going to win the next World Cup, right? These are, but is there a scenario where, for example, China so deindustrializes Germany? Okay, so one of the things we've all, as Europeans, have kind of assumed is that Germany will always dominate the manufacturing space. They'll build the best cars, those cars they'll sell all over the world, and in effect, Germany absorbs in energy and turns them into hard things, typically cars. Austria and Switzerland are derivatives of that. They're selling light machinery into the Germans, right? I'm not an expert, but I hear from people and I'm reading that the pace of deindustrialization in Germany forced by China is really startling and very, very worrying for the Germans. So that's the first thing. So is there a world in which, for example, we were schooled to believe that the weakness of Europe was the periphery? Irish, Greeks, Italians, Spaniards. I'm not sure we've come around to the idea that if the weakness was at the center, that's the first thing. And that could change the willingness to accept that Germany is the driver of the system. The other thing is what happens in France next. You know, so if Le Pen wins, and from what I can gather, she looks at least in the leading position. You know, is there a world in which, and Russell has written about this, in which French debt becomes unfinanceable by the ECB? I'm not sure. But the amazing thing about central banking is that it is real alchemy. Because the central bank, if you print the currency, can buy all the French crud and put it into a big skip and forget about it. I mean, this is the weird thing with central banking. Now, what happens to the euro in that event? Certainly it loses its value, but maybe a deindustrialized Europe needs this. So I think those are the two big imponderables.
But in that case, evidently all the other countries come to ECB and say, you are buying French bonds, why not buying
That's
our
what I'm saying.
bonds?
So it's the
and that
weakness.
will blown up the Eurozone. Absolutely. It's a very possible scenario.
It is, but I think it's probably more logical is that the ECB, as a buyer of last resort, will coax in other buyers of those assets. Do you know what I mean? Which is what Draghi did in effect 10 years ago. It wasn't that the ECB wrote the check. It said we might write the check. So that, I mean, that's, you know, I was reading on the podcast, I interviewed a guy yesterday called Dan Wong, who's written a book called Breakneck, How China is Engineering the Future. It's really interesting stuff. And, you know, he makes the point that large parts of Europe are a mausoleum. You know, that we like tourism, we like to take our holidays, we like to go to nice restaurants. I'm not sure that's the case. I think that, you know, a united Europe, and I'm not a federalist, it's not in my nature, but a united Europe has got a population of 500 million. The United States has got 330. There's much more of us than them. Right? There's a hell of a lot more of us than them. GDP-wise and consumer power-wise, there's more of us. On average, we're wealthier, if you take it on a PPP basis. There are great technologies here. There's great potential here. We just can't divide, or can't unite. Hopefully Mr. Putin will help us unite. That's his job, right? His job is to scare the shit out of us so much that we all get together. He's doing a good job at the moment. I'm sure you're Russian too, are you? Yeah. I can hear the accent. Slusham, the accent.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question. It's a bit, let's say, in double parts. So if I were to take as a premise, and of course maybe there is an error in my premise, that the way we see government now and the way it's structured is something relatively recent. So in the past, I would say most societies were king-based or emperor-based and was very autocratic. And if we take that as a premise and we look also at the recent events with the war and how we have an emergence of blocs per se, with like Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, where China is actually very pushing for its currency to be adopted for all trade between these countries. And then on the other side, you have US, etc., etc. if we take that as a premise, and also the fact that you were mentioning cryptocurrency and how a lot of people are trying to, let's say, go against the system by creating something new, and perhaps Bitcoin might not be the answer, or other crypto digital assets that are available. But for people to be able, especially in countries like, let's say, where you mentioned, where you have created, like Kenya, where you create your own currency, or other places where it's not possible to pay through a banking system because it's either not created, it doesn't exist, or because people don't have the trust in the country, in the government. So I see that with these movements, I see that there is a possibility perhaps for an emergence of a completely new currency, which will be used by us because we are now having access to internet and technology that allows us to bypass, let's say, the government. So that's on one side. And at the same time, you have these blocks that are trying to push for their currency. So in the next, let's say, 10 to 20 years, would you say that our currency, the currencies we actually use and that we see on the market, will differ? So, for example, there would be an emergence of a new digital currency for those who want to be outside of this government control. And at the same time, do we see a consolidation of other currencies? So, for example, not having as many types of currencies of different countries, but actually consolidating into a few. Do you see that trend, or do you see some sort of other future for us in this sense?
No, I mean, this is a fascinating. This is a chapter in itself that I should have written in itself. I've concluded there. No, it's really fascinating what you're saying. I mean, what we know is that monetary history tells us that reserve currencies come and go, right? The biggest one in my parents' lifetime was sterling. Now, nobody wants it. But there was a time when it cleared all the trades of the world. And sterling probably lost its value because the British Empire disappeared very quickly. And you think, okay, well, the Americans, they're 4% of the world's population, they're 24% of GDP. Chances are that's going to fall over the next while. And you mentioned China and just Saudi Arabia. Lots of other countries would like to be in the position to be the reserve currency. I think there's one thing that we should think about, which is that the reserve currency demands that the central bank of that currency will add liquidity to the world in the case of a crisis. So the world needs dollars, and the Fed does QE, just gives them away. And that, I think, is part of an American, Pax American worldview. I'm not sure that China is prepared to bail out the rest of the world with its own currency just yet. There's no indication. So that's one thing. But does that mean that there's not going to be competitions? Absolutely. And those competitions, because, why should China and Saudi Arabia, if they're trading oil with each other, clear that trade in American dollars? I mean, why should they buy American dollars? It makes no sense, completely no sense. So I think you're absolutely right. As the world changes, the dominant currency will change. And you could, as you say, and that maybe links to your question, the euro is a bloc. And the reason the euro emerged was that the French had been agitating it for years. The Germans were against it. Then we had shock unification. The French said, this is our chance. And we know what happened, is that Mitterrand said to Helmut Kohl, you can have East Germany if we have your money. That's what happened. And the French said, the Germans said, oh, okay. So that accelerates. So these things happen, these moments happen. So you're absolutely right, like anything can happen in this regard. And you'd be crazy to rule things out. That's the first thing. With respect to the crypto, there is, now maybe I'm wrong here, but there is a narrative that people don't trust government. And I'm not sure that narrative is that persuasive. I think most countries, people do trust their government. I think that very rich people don't trust government because they come here and avoid tax. And very poor people don't like government because they're poor and they're fed up. But I don't see any incipient revolt worldwide against the present system. I really don't see it. But I think your point about Africa is essential. Africa's up for grabs. And if mobile phone credit can be money, anything can be money. And so maybe Africa is the theatre for digital currency. Simply because, as I said, there is a problem, which is a non-banking sector in the economy, and there is a solution, which is, as you said, digital. And it could be quite interesting that the poorest countries in the world will be the most financially innovative.
So just to add to that question, just one slight one. So if you had to put your money on 3 currencies in the near future for the next 20 years, which ones do you think would be in this consolidated world?
Wow. Wow. Okay.
No rich economists.
No rich economists.
There's no rich economists. Yeah. Okay. Well,
The opposite.
the main one has to be the renminbi. It has to be the Chinese currency. It has to be. You know, the way things are going, the march of China is the fact of the 21st century. Everything else, I mean, if there's one thing we can actually bet on, is that as long as there's free trade, China is winning. And once you have a current account surplus of that extraordinary nature, and you have to become the world's creditor. And once you become the world's creditor, you have to settle your trades in your own currency. The question is whether the Politburo in China wants that, because that's a big deal.
Whether there'll be free trade.
Or whether there'll be free trade. Donny J doesn't want it.
Yeah.
China. But this is why monetary economics is endlessly fascinating, because it's actually at the fulcrum of politics and strategy and all those good things.
You talked about social technology, and I suppose the ultimate social technology is people. What's the impact of depopulation on economic models now in the next few years and on currency? And you say China, for example, if the population collapses, how does that impact everything? And people talk about climate, but a lot of people are talking about that could be the bigger short-term impact on all economic models and everything around that. It's not just money. How do you see that playing out in the next few years as well, or that impact on
now
money?
We're getting into spoofology now. We're getting into the 3 pints later, and I'll tell you another thing.
We can close on spoofology.
About the climate. We close at scoopology, yeah. Scoopology is a particular Irish thing that...
It's a precursor to spoofology.
Yeah. It's you go from spoofology to scoopology, and then you go to bed. I think that obviously, to some degree, demographics is destiny. But to another degree, it's not. Japan is a very interesting example. I mean, the Japanese are supposed to disappear in the next 100 years or whatever the things. They've managed to deal with an aging population very, very well. All of Europe has kind of managed to deal with an aging population very well. I mean, there are cultural arguments that you can get into about what constitutes a European and blah, blah, blah. And God knows, that's real spoofology. The climate is a very strange one, because I remember breaking it out into a cold sweat when I heard the opening bars of Glenroe. Do you remember Glenroe? So Glenroe was an Irish TV soap opera that aired at 8:30 on a Sunday night. And the reason I broke out in a rash was that it always signaled to me that I hadn't done my homework, right? So the homework was given on a Friday afternoon by the priests. And I said, okay, I'll do my Latin homework on Friday night and my chemistry, and I'll do my Irish Tishel Ginnadoxia, bye. And I never did a top. And I went out drinking in fields and acting a maggot. And then on Sunday night, I freaked out. And that is procrastination. That it's not until the very last moment that we actually change our behavior. And in a way, that's what climate change is to me. It's the Glenroeization, right? Is that it's only when we really realize that climate change is upon us that I think we'll change our behavior dramatically. And I haven't seen any major event in the last 20 years that has forced humans to change their behavior. In fact, we haven't in the main. So I'm not saying that it's not a real thing. I'm just saying our human behavior.
I think I meant more the birth rates rather than people talk about climate, but the birth rates is probably, that's probably the biggest change in human behavior in all of history of humanity, I suppose.
Yeah, and we Irish people should know that because we've had the most spectacular demographic thing. There was 8 million of us, and then there was 2 million of us. That's pretty impressive, right? I mean, we've done it, and the place was desolate for a long time. I think that falling birth rates are a normal reaction to prosperity. And does that impact on the economy? Well, absolutely, because young people spend and older people save as a general rule. And young people are more adventurous and they go out more and they're more dynamic. But I'm not sure that, if you look at the most dramatic population event that Europeans have ever experienced was the Black Death. And the amazing thing about the Black Death is it led to the Renaissance, the Reformation, a massive increase in income per head. So humans adapt. This is the interesting thing. So if the climate change is our birth rate is the Black Death of the 21st century, the record isn't so bad. Listen, I think we should probably leave it there. Thank you all so much I will sign some books.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
We have some drinks and
I will certainly have a glass of wine.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Thank you very, very much. Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers, Boris. Thanks very much.
No, this is great.